Hey there. Thank you for joining us for this episode of 13. Before we get started, as always, we want to thank our new patrons. Michael Gaerton, Cato Liu, Taliesin Otto, Dawn Beresford, Elizabeth Wolf, Danny Daggers, Bedlam, Zaid, and Abby Wilson. Thank you so much for your support, and welcome to the Pod Fam. If you'd like to hear your name in audio, then you should check us out on Patreon. You'll find perks like Patreon-exclusive bonus stories and merch, too. Head on over to patreon.com/pod13 or click the link in the show notes. Today's story is The Park by Kevin LeCompte. Are you ready? Sit back, turn down the lights, and now, on with the show.
My impression of the Notchland Inn was that it may well have been the nicest place I'd ever stayed in my life. If not for the fact that the most terrifying thing imaginable happened the weekend that we stayed there. Looking back, it's crazy to consider that I wouldn't have even been there if it weren't for my infidelity. Sure, Mel and I had hit a rough patch ever since we'd had a child together, but that was no excuse for what happened. My secretary? She was attractive. In fact, Mel always used to be wary of Tanya, and I'd always brushed it off. I'd say all the right things to alleviate her worries. After all, I wasn't a cheater. I'd never do something like that to my wife. Until I did. Until I was. The details don't matter. It was unexpected and, to be honest, it was rather quick. Tanya had just gone through a divorce herself and began dressing differently around the office. Mel had been treating me like shit, and Tanya was just there. And, well, you've seen these kinds of movies before. Maybe even read a trashy romance novel or two. The only thing I can hang my hat on is that I immediately felt terrible and confessed the next evening. I told her, and then I had Tanya move to a different department. Though I'd been a terrible husband, I'm being sincere when I say that I was a pretty good father. I loved the hell out of my little Christopher. He just turned 2 years old, and I made it a priority to spend as much time as I could with my little guy. We were happy to be parents, excited, and we were doing a good job, all things considered. But the lack of sleep had really taken its toll. Neither of us did well with the lack of sleep. Tempers grew short. We each began to put up walls. Stubborn coldness filled the air of our home, more days than not. I did bedtime, and Mel took the morning shift and would let me sleep in. The price tag for that schedule read, "No sex life," as Mel was almost always sleeping by the time I crawled into bed. You can do the math. It felt like the plot of a Lifetime movie. And that was our life. When Mel found out she had to travel to New Hampshire to lead a seminar on emerging medical technology and equipment, she insisted that we all go together, and I didn't argue with that. I knew that part of the reason she wanted me to be there was because she didn't feel like she could trust me anymore. I understood that, no matter how much I hated it. The plan was for us to travel together and check into the inn on Saturday. Mel would drive south a couple of hours to the university, just until Sunday, when she'd head back to join us for the rest of the week. The hope was that the getaway would do us some good, bring us closer together, and help heal our marriage. Under the surface, though, it wasn't looking good. The one-night stand had sent Mel spiraling. and she'd been colder and angrier than ever. It was all my fault, and I knew that. But none of it felt good, and none of it looked good. I couldn't help but feel that our marriage was over. We just hadn't admitted it yet. We'd reached the hotel after our 4-hour drive, checked into our room, unloaded the car, and then sat in silence for a few minutes before Mel finally spoke up.
Well, I have to go.
I nodded at her as she stood and headed over to give Christopher a hug. She squeezed him tight, and my heart smiled and sunk at the same time as I heard him say, "Mommy, don't go, Mommy."
Aw, I have to, baby. I'll be back.
She rubbed his little back. Then she glanced up at me, and I could see that her eyes had begun welling up. I watched her swallow a lump in her throat before she stood and walked over to the door without coming to say goodbye to me. I sighed and shook my head as she walked away from us. But just as she reached the door, she did turn back to look. She put her fingers to her lips and gave a kiss as she locked eyes with me, though she didn't make the extra effort to blow it my way. The door shut, and she was gone. My own eyes welled up then, too. I thought of myself as a fun dad, not some lay around playing on my phone while my kids stared at the TV all day kind of dad. That day would be no different, though I had to admit that I wished I'd made a different choice. If I hadn't decided to go explore the area around the inn, maybe I could have avoided all the events that followed. But not having a crystal ball to see the future, I did in fact decide to throw Christopher into the stroller, then head out the front door with no specific plan in place. I rolled the stroller out and began walking along the side of the inn. I remembered reaching a point where I had to choose to stay on the paved sidewalk or make my way through a man-made path that went to a forested area. For some reason, I decided it was best to let the 2-year-old choose. I knelt down beside the stroller, rubbed my hands through his hair, and I asked, "Which way, little man?" I pointed to the sidewalk, and then I pointed to the dirt path off to the left. "This way or that way?" He immediately pointed toward the dirt path and said, "Park, Daddy, park." I nodded, not sure what he meant by that, and assuming it reminded him of the trail near our home that did in fact lead to a park. Regardless, the little man had spoken, so we turned and went down the dirt trail. In fact, we did find a little park tucked away back there, though it was different from any park I'd ever seen. It had a much older feel to it, and seemed a little bit dangerous. One piece of equipment looked like someone had replaced a teeter-totter board with a ladder, and the thing looked like it was created with the sole purpose of breaking bones. Fortunately, my little man had fallen in love with a safer area off to the left side of the park. It had 3 simple steps leading up to 3 different styles of toddler slides. It was perfect, and I was grateful that he'd chosen a safe spot to focus his attention on. After watching him go up and down a few times, I pulled out my phone to see if Mel had texted yet. She hadn't. I hated myself for my next thought, but it ran through my head nonetheless. And it's not the first time I'd thought it in the past few weeks. I wondered if Tanya would text me. I'm not saying that I wanted her to, but I did wonder if she would. I still couldn't get those memories of her body out of my mind. I knew what she looked like. I knew what she felt like. But I hated myself for it. I shook my head and growled out some swears as I tried to get these thoughts out of my mind. When I turned back toward the toddler slides, looking for Christopher, I didn't see him. I panicked and began yelling his name as I turned all around searching for him, trying to decide whether I should run in this direction or that if I couldn't catch sight of him. Then, I heard the dragged-out screeching of a swing. I turned back to where I'd seen the swings And my son was there. He was sitting in a safety swing, swinging very high, higher than I would have liked. And there was a woman standing there. She was pushing him. I couldn't make out her face because she was wearing an old-fashioned cartwheel hat. It went well with the old-fashioned looking dress she wore, but it was strange not to be able to see her face. I hurried over there and I apologized as I ran, thanking her for catching him before he could run off somewhere. I expected her to say something, but instead, she just began humming lullabies, and she kept pushing him, higher and higher. I spoke up. "Thanks, I've got him now," I told her. I walked closer and reached toward him. I thought that she'd stop pushing him then, but instead, she kept on, higher and higher, still humming her lullabies. I was getting angry, and I tried to slow him down by grabbing the front of the swing, but not wanting to hurt him, I was careful not to stop it too abruptly. The momentum of the swing brought us back toward the woman again, and to my shock, she kept pushing the swing. It all but hit me in the face. I grabbed the swing more firmly this time, and I forced it to a stop, lifting him up and out of there. He looked up at me. "Park," he said. "Park, Daddy, park." I smiled and nodded. Then I brought him in for a quick little hug, and I said, "Yeah, buddy, it's a park." As I held him, a thought occurred to me that I hadn't seen any other kids playing at the park. It made me wonder who the woman was even there with. I stood up and I turned back toward her. But when I did, she was nowhere in sight. I had a cold feeling, uncomfortable as I tried to make sense of it. Christopher had made his way back over to the toddler slides, and I wanted to watch him more closely. I made time to glance around here and there, wondering if she might still be nearby, hiding or, I don't know, something. The entire encounter had just been so strange. After a minute or so, I decided enough was enough, and that it was just time to go. Something felt off about all of this. I felt dizzy, which made sense, because I'd been spinning all around looking for her. I grabbed Christopher in my arms, and he fought me for one more ride down the slide, but I wouldn't allow it. It was time to go. I felt like I needed to get out of there before it was too late. I was about to step out of the park area and back onto the grassy field that led to the dirt trail when I heard the long, drawn-out screeching of that swing again. I turned my head slowly, watching with my half-dropped jaw as the swing swung back and forth, up and down, while that same woman stood behind it, pushing it again and again. The swing was empty now, but still, she pushed it, starting up her humming again. Walking backwards, I stared at the strange image before me. An old-fashioned park and a strange woman that looked as though she'd stepped right out of a history book. As we neared the dirt path, I turned back one last time to see if the woman was still there. My eyes grew wide, and my heart pumped like a drum beat. The woman stood at the edge of the park, just staring at us. The swing still screeching as it continued swinging off in the distance behind her. I turned and ran with the stroller. Even after we'd reached the dirt path, after we crossed through it, even as we walked on the sidewalk back toward the inn, I heard the high-pitched crescendo of the swing catapulting back and forth. As I neared the entrance to the inn, I stopped briefly to take Christopher out of the stroller so I could hold him close and make sure he was okay. While walking back, I tried processing what had just taken place, and it added fuel to the fire that had begun burning inside me. One full of fear, as I'd imagined how all of it could have played out differently. That I could be calling the police right now to report a kidnapping. It didn't seem far-fetched. Clearly, the woman in the park had been dealing with some sort of mental health crisis. I fumbled my way through the front entrance, the only way to get through a door when carrying a child and wrestling with a stroller. I hurried my way up to the front desk. Calling the police actually sounded like a good idea the more I thought about it. I said as much to the man at the front desk, who immediately looked up at me alarmed. He asked what was going on, and I told him that something had just happened. I think that someone should look into it. A woman seems to be having a mental health emergency. To my delight, the man immediately nodded as he reached down to pick up the phone. He asked where she was now as he began dialing. She was down by the park, over there. I pointed past him in the direction that we'd come from. The man stopped dialing, and he looked back up toward me. "Park?" he asked. "What park?" I shook my arm frantically as I pointed. The park just past the dirt trail out back. The man nodded as he slowly hung up the phone. He told me that there's no park like that around here, that the park I seemed to be referring to was taken down decades ago. Now, it was something called the Abigail Jones Memorial. My heart sank. Feeling embarrassed all of a sudden, I asked, "The Abigail Jones Memorial? Who's Abigail Jones?" The man opened up a drawer off to the side, and he grabbed a sheet of paper from a small stack. He turned and handed it to me. I stared at the image near the top of the sheet as I felt myself swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't feel much else. My entire body turned cold and numb. I stared down at the black and white picture of the woman I'd just seen at the park. The park that apparently doesn't exist. Christopher piped up as I was staring at the image. "Park, Mommy," he said. It was a strange thing for my little guy to say, but I assumed he must be staring down at the picture just like me. But when I turned to look at him, I saw that he was staring back at the entrance of the hotel. And he continued staring that way as he pointed towards the front door we just entered. "Park, Mommy," he said again. Back in the room, I paced around with the paper in hand, rereading the PG-13 version of Abigail Jones's story. I'd had to do some research on my phone to get the unedited rated R version while Christopher stared at the TV screen. Apparently, Abigail Jones had been a wealthy woman in the area whose son had died from polio. Abigail had been well respected and loved in the community, in part because of her dedication to making the area a good place to raise children. She took it hard when her son died, and apparently suffered mental health episodes where she would go down to the park and push her son's favorite swing from when he had been alive. She would hum lullabies to him. All the while, the people who walked past felt so terrible for her. Her husband had tried to get her help, but to no avail. Then, one day, he couldn't get her to leave the park. So finally, after the sun had long since set and stars painted the nighttime sky, he walked up to her and put his hand on her shoulder. When he did, she immediately turned on him and began stabbing him in the throat with a knife that she'd been holding the entire time. The man died right there. One witness claimed that even later in the night, he'd walked past the park to see a woman sitting on the ground, cradling a man, rocking back and forth as she hummed lullabies. The bystander thought it was strange that the man wasn't moving, and he called the police. But when they arrived, the woman lay on the ground as well, a knife in her own throat, and her fingers wrapped around the handle. The community rallied around Abigail, choosing to remember the woman she'd been before her son died, before the mental health crisis. I'd plopped down on the bed as I tried to process what had happened and how the information tied into it all. The story was both interesting and terrifying, considering what had happened to us earlier in the day. In my research, I came across a few stories where people claimed to have seen the old park and the grieving mother there. But the websites were full of pop-up ads and were the kind of stories I'd normally find ridiculous. Except, it had just happened to me. I decided one thing for sure, that I had to go back up the path and at least see if the park was still there. I had to know if I was losing my damn mind, or if this was all a misunderstanding. I mean, maybe the guy at the front desk just didn't realize there was a park tucked away on the other side of the woods. It's not like it was visible from the inn. I just couldn't bring myself to drag my little guy back out there, just in case. It felt too risky to bring him back and maybe even dangerous. I'd have to find a way to go alone. I jumped to my feet as I realized that Christopher was no longer standing in front of the TV. I shouted his name. I knew I'd secured the door, so I wasn't too worried, but still, I didn't see him anywhere. I shouted his name louder, and I hurried over to the bathroom. It was the only place not immediately visible to me. The light was on in there, and Christopher was staring at the tall mirror on the bathroom door. He pointed up to it, and he said, "Park Mommy." The gift shop sold flashlights. Otherwise, my plan might not have worked. I figure if I moved quickly, ran once I was outside, that I could get back to the path, work my way through it, and shine the light over toward where the park had been just to see if it was there, before rushing back to the room. I figured I could do it in about 3 minutes. Was that okay to do? I considered. To leave my son sleeping in his pack and play alone for 3 minutes? I mean, if I were to walk down the hall to get ice and the ice was coming out slowly, and then I paused in the hallway while I checked the baseball scores on my phone, that might have taken 3 minutes, right? And nobody would think twice about that. My son would be sleeping. He'd be safe because the door would be locked, and I'd only be gone for about 3 minutes. I decided I had to do it because I had to know, and I had to keep my son safe at all costs, which meant I couldn't bring him with me. So, after he'd been sleeping for about 20 minutes, I sprang into action, shutting the door slowly but securely before hurrying toward the front door. Once I was through it, I was running toward the trail. It was darker than I'd expected it to be, so I had to use the flashlight before I'd reach the path. Tree branch shadows crept all around me as I neared the wooded area. I began jogging along the dirt path but froze when I heard a twig snap off to my right. I shined the flashlight off in that direction. There was nothing there, nothing visible at least, though I swore I could hear whispering. I just had to keep moving. All my limbs were tense with anxiety as I pictured my son sleeping alone back in the room. It seemed like an acceptable plan in my mind, but now that I'd actually gone and left my kid alone, it felt wrong. I was almost there though. A few more steps, and I'd reach the clearing, and I should be able to see what I needed to see. Once I was there, I froze again as I raised the flashlight up toward the park. Except, there was no park. Just a statue in the middle of a bare field, with a sign in front that read Abigail Jones Memorial. I was relieved to get back through the front door of the hotel. I felt guilty as I stared over at the security screen behind the desk, and watched myself walking in alone, without my son, without my wife who hated me. I was even more relieved when I stepped back into the room and saw Christopher still sleeping soundly in his pack-and-play. My head was spinning in confusion, though. I couldn't believe how quickly my entire world had flipped upside down. Something about this surreal experience put my life into new perspective. I thought about what I'd done to my wife. But more than that, my entire belief system had just been turned on its head. I'd never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. I liked watching scary movies, I just never really believed in the supernatural. I was exhausted too, and sleep eventually found me. But it wasn't a good sleep. In fact, Christopher woke up at some point and wouldn't go back down until I let him lay beside me. That was okay though. It felt good to hold him close, to know that he was safe there in my arms. Except that at some point, he wasn't in my arms. I awoke in a panic, thinking he'd fallen off the bed, but I couldn't find him anywhere, not even in the bathroom. Worse than that, the door to our room was slightly ajar. Then, some half-asleep memory flooded back into my mind. Something that must have happened not that long ago. Christopher had sat up in bed next to me. I'd whispered, "Go back to sleep, bud." But as I dozed back into sleep, he'd replied, "Park, mommy." Now I was really running all over the inn, searching the halls before rushing to the front desk, but there was nobody there. Just me staring back at myself in the security footage monitor behind the desk. An idea came to me, and I didn't stop to think about it. I hopped over the desk and dashed over to the computer connected to the monitor. I rewound the footage, slowly, and then I gasped as I saw my son walking backwards from the front door. I hit pause, and then play, and watched in horror as my 2-year-old son walked out the front door of the inn. His arm raised up in the air to his side, his fingers seemingly clasped around someone's hand, some invisible figure that appeared to be guiding my son out of the inn, out of my reach, out into the darkness of the night. "Park, mommy," I whispered to myself. Then I checked the time on the footage. It had been 12:13 a.m. I checked the time on my phone. It was 12:37. I hopped back over the desk, and I dashed out the front door, racing down to the park. I hadn't thought to bring my flashlight with me, so I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight app. I glanced up, and I noticed that my battery was running low. Then, I heard her. Abigail, humming lullabies in the distance as I reached the clearing. My light was dim, and I squinted to just faintly make out the park there before me in the distance. The memorial was gone, and the park had returned. I stared terrified as I saw my son sleeping in the swing as the woman pushed it higher and higher. But something happened when I reached the park. I stopped. Not by choice. Something stopped me. It was as if I had walked right into a wall, and it didn't take me long enough to check the perimeter and discover that I couldn't step onto the ground of the park. Not even a little bit. Some barrier prevented me. I shouted and I swore and I kicked at the invisible wall. I watched in horror as some strange, ghostly woman pushed my son in a swing and sang lullabies in the night. I collapsed as the darkest truth weighed down on me. That we shouldn't have even been here. That we'd only come along for the ride because of my infidelity. because my wife didn't trust me. That if I hadn't cheated, Christopher and I would be at home. He'd be safely tucked into bed, and I'd be snoring away in the bedroom beside him. But I did cheat, and we were here, outside at midnight. My son apparently locked away in some ghost prison. Would it disappear at dawn, or sometime before that? Would Christopher be free to run into my arms then? Would he disappear along with it? A voice growled into my ear, and I jumped and spun around. There was a man beside me. His throat was all carved up, and he looked faint, almost like a shadow, translucent. Like if I were to reach out and touch him, my hand would pass right through his. The man growled, "She's not well. She hasn't been well since all of this." He sniffled and shook his head. I realized who he must be, Abigail's husband, and I supposed that made sense. I asked him if he could help me, that my son was in there with her. He looked away and he shook his head. He said that there was a limit to his power, that there'd be a price to be paid to get him out. He turned and he stared back at me. It would be a steep price. "Anything," I shouted. "Anything, just please, help me get him out of there. He's only 2 years old." The man nodded, and he turned and looked toward his wife, still pushing my son on the swing. The chains were still squeaking, like a rusty pendulum. And then he said, "Say your goodbyes." I nodded, the reality of the situation hitting me like a hammer in the head. But I never doubted for a moment. Never once did I question whether or not I'd give my life to save him. I had to get things ready though, so I knew that he'd be safe out here on his own. I texted Mel. I apologized one last time and told her that I loved her. I explained what I could, knowing the text would sound ridiculous on her end. And then I called the police and planned to wait until I saw them approaching before exchanging places with my son. Once I was trapped in there and him trapped out here, I wouldn't be able to help him. My phone dinged, not quite dead yet, and my heart leapt out of my chest. I was grateful that I'd get at least one response from my wife before I passed on or before whatever was about to happen to me. But it wasn't my wife. It was Tanya, texting me a picture of her wearing sexy lingerie with a message saying that she missed me. I fell to the ground and let out a cry of despair as my sins washed over me and I felt judgment had arrived. I saw flashlights in the distance, and I knew that the time had come. I told Abigail's husband that I was ready. He nodded as he took my hand and walked me into the park. I turned back to see the policeman collecting my son, and I smiled, knowing that at least he'd be safe. Then I felt a lightning bolt of pain, and the world faded to black. Time works different here, and sometime later, I found myself pacing around the park when I noticed my wife Mel walking across the field toward me. The man who'd been working the front desk was with her, and he pointed up to where I was. I smiled and shouted and waved, but I quickly realized that they couldn't see or hear me. They walked around for a few minutes, just glancing here and there and talking. Then, they turned to walk back the way they came. I shouted her name as loud as I could, but I wasn't able to run after her. I cried out, "Mel, wait, I'm so sorry. I love you." And then she turned ever so slightly, glancing back my way as she brought her hand up to her lips, and she kissed her fingers. I could see tears streaming down her face as she reached out and blew the kiss my way. I watched as my wife disappeared through the trees, and then I listened as the swing began squeaking behind me, as Abigail started humming her lullabies again. And all of a sudden, the night came quickly.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 13. If you like what you heard, stop what you're doing and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This has been The Park by Kevin LeCompte, narrated by Ian Epperson. The wife was Brooke Jennett. Music composed by Caleb Ritchie. Editing and sound design by Brooke Jennett. Additional assistance from Bridget Freeman and Mason Amadeus. Our producer-level patrons are Tattooed Fox, Rhiannon, Sean Geary, Anthony Diaz, Amy Harper, Jackie K, Chantel Payne, Jake R, Emily Toll, Jessica Yaramillo, Jennifer Gatlin, and Drybones Jones. Thank you guys so much for your support. Click the link in the show notes to learn more about joining us on Patreon. And check us out on social media. You can find us most places under Pod 13. And you can join the Facebook group for 13 Podcast. Just look for the logo, and you'll find links in the show notes. Need some 13 swag for the holidays? Go to imaginary.click/merch, or click the link in the show notes. If you'd like to submit a story to be performed on the show, or if you'd like to contact us about anything else, you can get in touch at info@13podcast.com. You'll find submission guidelines and other info on our website, 13podcast.com. You can find that in the show notes too. Bridget Freeman is still pushing that empty swing. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.